Our purpose here today is to talk about the drowning in the viaduct at 13th and Oak on September the 8th. Our purpose today is brought about by a number of our open records requests are due today to be released, and we thought that it would be timely to talk about the things that we can discuss. There is still an ongoing death investigation by LMPD. A number of the pieces of information cannot be released, but some things we can talk about. And so we first wanted to express condolences to the family of Mr. Sept, that and his friends at Yellow Cab. You know, certainly it's a tragedy, and we mourn with them about something that that we hope to be able to avoid in the future. What we're going to talk about is, joining me today is our emergency manager, Jody Myman. Also next to him is Chief Greg Frederick, the Louisville Division of Fire. Mr. Barry Bingham, who's the Chief of Operations for MSD and is our floodplain manager and can answer questions later if you have any. And Jesse Halliday, who is the PIO for LMPD. Just to tee up where we are, that weekend, going into the weekend, we had notified other city agencies as well as the mayor's office of the forecast for the next 4 days. And personally, I sent this one out myself to the mayor's staff that we were expecting 2 to 3 inches over 4 days, and that that I mentioned that I didn't think that would be problematic for our community. The next day, Saturday morning, that forecast was adjusted to say that it would be more widespread as far as throughout the state, but the forecast would still be 2 to 3 inches for the 4-day period. And that information I sent out with, as well as our contractor, who said there would be a trace of rain. Quite clearly, there was a little bit more than a trace of rain. We do know from after the fact the 4-day total was anywhere from 2 inches to 7.9 inches, depending upon where you were in Jefferson County. So that created a problem for us, and we'll talk about how that problem developed into the issue related to 13th and Oak. Let me introduce Mr. Jody Myman, the Director of Emergency Management, MetroSafe.
Thank you, Chief Hamilton. Oops. Sorry. So, like Chief Hamilton said, just to walk you through the events of that day, we were in constant contact with the National Weather Service from even the morning. You know, we knew there was going to be some lightning in the area. We knew that there was the potential for some for severe storms. But like Chief Hamilton said, we were under the impression it was going to be about 2 to 3 inches of rain through that Sunday evening. The emergency management personnel were in constant contact with the National Weather Service through the evening. We were also in constant contact with the MetroSafe 911 communication system to get real-time information on what was actually going on during the actual event. There was a few water-related issues prior to 8 o'clock. There was, like Chief Hamilton said again, there was a variety of rain totals just depending on where you were in Jefferson County. Due to the rain that was coming down, the contact that we had with the National Weather Service after 8 o'clock, and then the runs that started to spur up that were water-related, we did decide to activate the Emergency Operations Center at 8:18 in the evening on Saturday night. During this time, we had 18 dispatchers on. There was 10 911 call operators during the event. The calls for service between 9 and 10, that was our peak time. There was 296 calls for service, and we'd like to compare that to what we had at the same time last year. This time last year, the calls for service were 99, so you can see how the weather event, caused more calls to come into the 911 center. Louisville Fire responded to 63 water incidents, and there was 11 other incidents in the suburban fire area as well. Just a few things about the call specific to Mr. Sept. He made his first of 3 telephone calls to 911 at 8:46. Twice he confirmed his location at Dixie and Oak Street. We sent Louisville Fire Resources, rescue resources, to Dixie and Oak. They checked and there was no vehicle found in the area. Another call for service came in from another bystander at 13th and Oak at 8:52. So that's what got the response from Louisville Fire to go to the 13th and Oak address. And then they were dispatched at 8:53 p.m. and arrived at 8:56 p.m. To 13th and Oak. I'm going to introduce Chief Greg Frederick, who's going to talk about his response.
Okay, first of all, to preface, the Louisville Fire Department, all of our responding units, all 27 of our units that come out of 21 stations are all trained to an awareness level for water rescue. All of our firefighters in every riding position have personal flotation devices in case they are in a situation where they need to don that equipment due to high water. They also have the knowledge to know whether or not they should go in the water or whether they should call for one of our teams that is specially trained to do swift water rescue and dive rescue. So when this initial run came into Dixie and Oak, we responded a unit out of our headquarters station, and they respond with a rescue truck as well as a four-wheel drive pickup truck that has a boat trailer. Once we got en route to that, as we received the information, there were other runs coming in, one run in Shively and several other requests for water rescue. We have the ability to split that unit. And they can split into two teams depending on the number of rescuers that we have on duty that day. And then we have a third unit that comes out of the Portland Fire Station, 2500 Griffiths, that's also trained in swift water rescue. So typically we can deploy about 3 to 4 rescue teams just with our on-duty everyday personnel. So we split the unit, and initially we sent a rescue boat to go to the run in Shively. Once they called that they had the person out of that vehicle, when the call came in to respond to 13th and Oak, that pickup truck with the boat responded to that location. When they arrived on scene, the report from the company officer was that the roof of the car was just barely visible above the water line. So once they arrive on scene, don all their equipment they need to have on, and then got on the boat to go out into the viaduct to try to access the vehicle. By the time they got out there, the vehicle had totally submerged. They weren't able to do a search of the vehicle due to the water conditions, due to the fact that it was below the surface, and so therefore they returned to the shore, and not being able to locate anybody, they went ahead and cleared that scene in order to respond to some of the other water rescue incidents coming in. As Jody mentioned, we had 63 total incidents, and they were everything from people submerged up to their chest level in vehicles to people that were simply in about a foot of water that needed assistance with being walked to higher ground or out of a dangerous situation. So there were, like I said, there was a number of incidents. Once we started to get a lot of calls for service for water rescues, we deployed regular units to those scenes to confirm whether or not they needed the more trained water rescue technicians. So that's how we basically handled a lot of those incidents. The unit that had made 13th and Oak, after they had made several other incidents, the water started to recede. They went back to the scene at 13th and Oak. The car was still in what I believe was about, according to the report, about 4 feet of water. They went back out in the boat and accessed it and found the victim in the back of the vehicle. So.
Thank you, Chief. As I mentioned, we had the opportunity to work with our floodplain manager from MSD and Mr. Brian Bingham and Mr. Mark Thomas, and helped us to deal with some of the frustration I think that we have. And we expect you all every time there's a rain event to push that message about turn around, don't drown. However, I think all of us are sometimes surprised at the number of people that think they can make it and take a risk like that. And so we had an opportunity, because the Smart Cities conference was in town, to talk to a number of other cities about how do you all deal with this issue and what information exists that we can already take advantage of that maybe we could use in an innovative way to try to warn people what may be going on, because clearly when you have 72 people that thought that they could make it, then that's telling you that our message is not really getting where it needs to be. And so we need to be even more vocal and more innovative in trying to do that. Well, in that discussion that Brian and Mark were in, they talked about some hydrological data that they can collect, that they have at the viaducts, since they manage the viaducts as part of the floodplain. And that we may be able to marry their data, which takes readings every 5 minutes, their data with our water rescue data, as well as other data that we have from the National Weather Service on total rains in the past, and be able to build a system that will allow us to, at certain levels, of course, we would have to have their expertise, at certain levels, it would trigger warning lights on the viaduct that we would install in the deepest and steepest of the viaducts that we have. And that's something that we thought, well, that's a great idea. It's something that we hope to be able to work through. It may take us a little bit of time to get it started. In the interim, what we would do, again, working with MSD and Public Works, is that we would get the depth levels of each of the 32 viaducts throughout Jefferson County, and then go about painting the depth levels of all of the viaducts so people could at least have a warning as to how deep the water may be should they go in it. Clearly, we're going to have to figure out ways. This is where you all are going to be able to help us, I believe, better ways for us to be able to notify. As you well know, for any of you that were in town on Saturday, the iPods, which is the Integrated Public Alert Warning System, went out for flash flooding for everybody that has a cell phone. You can't turn that off. That's one way. We may be able to use something like that. Those are pushed by the National Weather Service. But we also want to look at other ways that you all may be able to help us. So it's something that I think is part of our ongoing practice of trying to improve off of things that you may learn or know from other cities, as well as improvement that we're looking for each time that we have an incident. As I mentioned, if there's any questions for our floodplain manager, we'll be glad to deal with that, or any questions you may have from either Jody Myman or to Chief Frederick, we'd be glad to entertain those.
Chief Hamilton, let me ask, the timeline here, my main question is, on bullet point number 2, it says, Mr. C.I. called 911 himself. Metro Safe dispatched a little fire to Dixie and Oak. They arrived at 8:54 but found no one. Did they enter the water?
No, I think you may have misheard that, Mr. Bailey. He was not aware of his location. He sent us to the wrong location twice.
Did at any point the taxi cab company call 911 as well?
They did. Our very first notice was from the Yellow Cab Company, who stated that one of their drivers had called them to say that he was in trouble, that he was in water. They did not know where he was. They knew that he was en route to the 2300 block of Hill Street, so they assumed that he was on Hill Street.
When fire crews arrived and they saw the car completely submerged, at that point, did they have reason to believe that there was a person inside?
If you want to address that, Chief.
Well, because the vehicle was submerged, they were unable to do a search of the vehicle or access it. It was a couple of feet below the surface. When they tried to step out of the boat onto the vehicle, it actually moved in the water, and because of the conditions that were in the viaduct, we didn't deploy rescuers into that situation because it's not a stable environment for them to try to conduct a search.
At that point, though, did they believe that it was Mr. Zayad who was in that vehicle, or that?
I don't believe they were aware of all the information that had gone on, because when we deploy those resources, they're not equipped with mobile data. They simply use radio transmissions to be dispatched and to give the information back and forth with Metro Safe. So I don't believe they did, no.
But at that third bullet point, it says the SWIFT team entered the water at 9 p.m. but was unable to access the vehicle and reported they could find no victims. So was he
Right.
not in the vehicle when the body was in the vehicle when he got there?
You can't tell because
It was
of,
so submerged?
yes.
Could he have been alive at that moment?
I don't know. That'd be speculation. I don't know if that's possible or not. If you read all of the national trade magazine articles and things, typically when a vehicle is fully submerged like that, it's very little chance of survivability. Anywhere from 30 seconds to 4 minutes for a vehicle that goes into high water to completely submerge.
Did first responders hear any banging or anything like that?
No, sir.
Did first responders have a protocol to break the windows, even if they can't see in the vehicle if anyone's in there, to break in there anyway?
They do, but they weren't able to access the vehicle. It was below the surface to the point where they couldn't. You have to be able to get to the vehicle and in order to do that. And it was not only submerged, but also had some movement going on as well.
Is this largely a miscommunication of Mr. Syed giving the wrong location initially? Is this a miscommunication between dispatchers and fire, or where was the breakdown in not knowing exactly where he was when he entered the water?
I can't really answer that.
Taxi cab drivers usually have a relatively good grip on locations throughout the city. Could it have been maybe just lost in translation because of a language barrier?
I really can't speak to that, but what I will say is anytime we respond to either a structure fire or a situation like this, the assumption is that there's potentially someone in the dwelling or in the vehicle. But because we weren't able to access it to determine that, we weren't able to do a positive search of that vehicle, and that's why they returned once the water had receded. But it gets to the point where it's a submerged vehicle and we're unable to do a search of it.
Chief Hamilton, were barricades set up at 13th, 15th and Oak, where that bridge is right like this?
No, they were not. But first, Philip, let me address your misinterpretation. No, sir, there was not any miscommunication between dispatchers and responders. And Mr. Syed spoke passable English. It's clear he didn't know where he was at. That's not unusual. I mean, I suspect there every day you may find yourself in the same position. So we're not going to beat him up for not knowing exactly where he's at. When responders went to Dixie and Oak and found nothing, they pinged his telephone to try to get a better location. But by then, a bystander had then called in the correct location that a car was completely submerged under 13th and Oak.
There was a gentleman at 13th and Oak who had told me that his brother had been behind Mr. Syed when he was first driving in. If barricades had been there or a barricade manned by emergency personnel, police officer, someone like that, do you think that would have deterred him?
You know, it'd be very difficult to say. Obviously, we had, I believe, the first call for us to send barricades out to flooded locations was a little after 8 p.m. in the 1400 block of Frankfurt Avenue. So we had begun to ask for barricades, but we had not asked for one for this location as yet. So it'd be hard to say. I think that's one that's very impossible to try to predict.
Did the city do an adequate job putting up barricades that night?
Well, we have a contractor that does that. I think probably what you're hearing and what you may have read in other articles is that we don't have a lot of luck with barricades when it comes to flooding, simply because people move them and we spend a great deal of our time putting them back. We are more excited about working with the possibility of very visible warning lights than we are barricades, although we understand some people might respect them, the majority of people do not.
But Mr. Syed and the others didn't make that choice.
No.
Time for one more question. This press release states that steps are being focused on educating the public and improving warning for high water incidents. However, this does not mention anything about the current MSD drainage system. Do you think that that is a concern?
I'm not sure that I quite understand your question. Maybe Brian does, but
Rephrase that.
Well, there's been some criticism about our drainage systems and that they are antiquated and that they are not equipped to handle flash flooding events because no money has been put into them to make improvements throughout the years.
Okay, so I understand your question. So the system that is in place in this area was constructed in 1911. It was constructed before there was actually even a railroad overpass there. Those systems are very old, but many times those old ones are the ones that are the best built. We have made it very clear that there are definitely needs within the community. But let me also be clear that when you get into flash flooding situations, the lowest areas are the ones that fill first. These areas are very low. These viaducts are very low areas. They tend to work pretty well until you get to these really intense storm events. So there was some information about the amount of predicted rain, but there was also a forecast of only a 1 inch per hour maximum rain intensity. It was a much more intense storm. Those tend to fill those areas up more quickly. We certainly have a plan out there. We've been through the community. We're working to try to get additional funds to make additional improvements, including to the viaduct systems throughout the community.
If this happens again this weekend, what happens differently?
I'm going to let you answer first.
I think it depends upon what the prediction is. If someone said there's going to be a 2 to 3 inch rain over a 4-day period, no, we would not pre-deploy barricades. However, in the past, depending upon what the forecast has been, we have sent them to other locations to be deployed at a later time. For instance, 7th and 11th, 6 Mile and Breckenridge, 3rd and Eastern, those kind of places that perhaps flood each time. So it really depends upon the information that we have at the time when we make the decision.
Do you know how much sewage or wastewater went into Kentucky's waterways during that time?
Well, I don't.
We are calculating that right now. We should have that available in the next couple of days.
Thank you all.